Hi, everyone. Here I am with Marlo Fisken. Marlo, thank you again for doing this, and I'm excited to hear your wisdom.
I'm ready for this adventure that we're about to go on.
So I like to start these conversations with the question of what does embodiment mean to you?
Well, I have the great fortune of being a moving person, a lot of moving throughout my entire life. So, this inclination to move and the knowing that moving is integral to my well being, I think
Mm,
is tied to this sense of embodiment and just staying really connected to that urge, the knowing that when things come up that feel a little bit like agitation, or they feel just, there's a feeling there that's strong, that movement is one of the best things that we could possibly do to process what's coming up, whether it's just a sensation of like a nagging, an ache. I call them like the things that sometimes we note and say, oh, my something hurts, or like, oh, I really should stretch. That it has become instinctual for me to use movement and to take a moment to connect with the sensations and ultimately the pleasure of moving right away.
mm,
And so I think perhaps embodiment, I at least partially equate that with being able to like heed your body's need for movement, being able to note the
mm.
ways that your body says, like, I'm hungry to be moved, or I'm hungering for stillness, and then do that thing.
Hmm. So it sounds like like an honoring of more quickly noticing feeling when a certain sensation or discomfort, or not even discomfort, of being able to more quickly and readily recognize if your body's wanting to move and how it wants to move. And
Yeah, I think, if somebody's well attuned to what nourishes them most in terms of food, they're
mm,
better able to say, well, I'm hungry, and what specifically am I hungry for? And
mm,
and have that nuanced understanding of, oh, you know what, I'm in the need for something that's like a lot of protein right now. And that's a skill that you can develop. And similarly with being in your body, for like feeling there's a lot of buzziness, you could stay there with that buzziness and maybe have difficulty doing what you're doing, or you could say, like, or just not even think, just know that that means like it's time for bouncing. It's bounce time.
yeah.
And I need a lot of bounce time personally.
I
So
was going to ask that, like, how does that, like, say you're like in a day working and you're on your computer and you're
mhm.
starting to, because that can happen to me in email world. I can start like, if computer glitches happen, my nervous system, I get heightened. I'm like, "Arr!" So if you have something
Yeah.
like that happen, what do you do in those moments?
Well, I'm gonna say that I think I've gotten to a point where I set up my body for the particular type of work that needs to be done. And if it's something like emails, which I really struggle with, like emails, or even like just caption writing, something like that, I know that I want to be standing, I have my wobble stool, and I have music on, like very rhythmic music,
Mm,
something that's like I'm going to be bouncing and like shaking, and because I can answer emails and be dancing at least pretty well from the ribs down at the same time. And it turns something that's drudgery into something that actually feels good, to
yeah.
be doing that. So um but of course I still catch myself, it's often when I have to do work on the phone that I almost just kind of smile at it now. I'm like, I register, like my knee is so twisted, and I'm like, have been sitting here feeling the discomfort and ignoring it, for like 2 3 minutes, and then, okay, well, remember, that was that signal to move has been there, but you've been so engrossed in what you're doing. So, yeah, just getting better at setting myself up for being able to more instinctually respond to my body's needs, because certainly some work setups make it really hard to make the adjustments really naturally.
Yeah.
So,
I want to
yeah.
go back to what you said about your body's signal to move, because I think that's key, and where it feels important to speak to, because I think it can be easy to override or ignore or not hear that until it becomes so loud that you can't ignore. Yeah. So do you mind just like speaking to what do you mean by your body's signal to move, and how could somebody help access that a little bit more readily? I know that's kind of a lot, but
yeah, no, I mean, I'll go right to my like direct experience in this moment. I feel tight in the front of my neck and throat. Now, I slept and had kind of a weird neck night like couple times recently, so I've been feeling funky in my neck. Also trained acrobatic stuff this morning, so sometimes when you're doing like bridgy stuff and coming up, a lot of the muscles in the front of your neck are working pretty hard. And it could also be because I'm in this moment with you on a podcast and I need to speak, and so there might be some like constriction around the throat. All of those things combined. And there's, of course, we can move by like moving our joints, but also using touch. And so something that would feel good for me in this moment is just starting to put my hands on where I'm feeling tension, these big ol' honking muscles, the SCMs in the front of my neck, and kind of just use my hands to move my tissues, because that's also movement, right? Just like we can move and create some glide between the layers of our body. So that's I was noticing my neck is kind of tight, and I could continue to try to have this conversation and maybe try to ignore it, or I could also talk and take care of it at the same time.
Totally.
Weird.
I love that so much, right? And actually, I'm like, I want to touch my neck.
Let's all.
I've been feeling my legs. I do that a lot when I'm on video, because like I'm such a touch person. I'll just naturally just kind of like massage and touch my legs, because I think it helps keep me more grounded versus like, ooh, I'm on video. But I love that that's like the both and, right? It's like you don't have to, okay, this is my hour in the morning when I move my body, or when this is when I'm thinking about my body. We're in our body all the time, 24/7. And to start being able to, oh, I'm noticing my neck is uncomfortable. It doesn't mean I have to know, okay, tonight I'm going to remember to do X, Y, and Z. It's like also right now, I could tend to it in this conversation. I can wiggle my arm, I can wiggle my shoulder, I can touch my neck. And I find one of the things I so appreciate and respect about you so much, Marlo, is especially like using your large platform for providing more permission for us to move in places and experiences where people aren't often moving, but probably want to be moving, but like it looks weird or strange or
that's something I've fallen into quite naturally, and I don't know how that's started becoming so central to like what it feels like I'm here to share. But at least I'm sure that at least partially it just originated in my own discomfort in so many of the places and cultural environments that I found myself in. And like I just perhaps knew from from my background, just being maybe a performer makes it okay if people see me moving, but recognizing like I it's okay for me to take this, be wiggling in the grocery store, or use more self-touch than is most conventionally appropriate. Like, oh, okay, it's all right to touch your own hands. People often do hand fidgeting, small, not too long facial touching is like somewhat, okay. But then there's a lot of other levels of duration of touch, or what areas of the body you touch. And of course, I'm not talking about like self-pleasuring in the grocery store.
That'd be like a whole other spectrum.
But at the same time,
the X-rated grocery store. It's only open on Fridays after 11 p.m.
I'm laughing though at the phrase self-pleasuring, because I'm like, no, but that's actually what I am doing all the time. I'm just not trying to like have an orgasm, but it is like, there's energy that I want to tend to, and I do in some ways feel more aroused and like attuned to life, because I've been like pleasuring myself by moving or by touch, like, oh,
you're waking yourself up even from that proprioceptive sense, right? You're continuously waking your body up. You're helping with cortical mapping, and it is pleasurable. It feels good. And I think it's life-giving. It is that sense of aliveness that instead of just trying to like mentally override the discomfort and be like, I'm okay, or I'm just going to release the anxiety. I love that you're just like, I'm just going to move. I'm going to wiggle it. I'm going to touch it. And how that can evoke so much more presence and enjoyment and just actually be in the interaction or be in the scenario.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is hard for people. You know, it can be hard to drop into those things. My favorite gateway towards willingness to try things that might make us a little uncomfortable is always like humor and playfulness. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, within classes, I sometimes bring people into like this little bit of a world that I'm creating where they become more willing to, let's say, like vigorously rub their thigh meat back and forth. And it's because it's actually not done with a seriousness. I often find people are more willing to do it. So yeah, like approaching some of these things that can be such prickly areas for us, like maybe touching some regions of our body or moving in public, through a little bit more silliness or comedy is a way that I have like great success with getting people to do things that they normally wouldn't do. Not the only way, but it certainly can.
I think it's an important way to keep that playfulness. Yeah. And even I think if like, I'm really grateful that you even just brought that up of like, if somebody, how do you know, maybe someone's listening to this and wanting to move more, but it does feel awkward or they maybe feel alone in it, of how could they even create their own game in a day of this exciting game you're going to play of, you know, I'm waiting in line at the post office or I'm at the grocery store and, you know, how many weird looks can I get, you know, and the I don't know, but just to that even just allows it to not take yourself so seriously and to not be so worried about whatever you're perceiving people are thinking, and instead just get to do what your body wants to do.
But perceiving people thinking is big, because people will say to me like, oh, if I did that, people would look at me and think. And I'm like, well, maybe they're looking at me and thinking that too. Or maybe they're not. They're probably not.
They're usually not.
They're usually not.
Usually not. Or what I've been finding in like even the airport, this was recently, and I was right at my gate. It was super crowded, but I was flying from Newark to Paris. And I was like, I need to move and stretch before getting on this flight. So I literally found this little corner, but there was a large group of women right around it that were clearly all together. So I just let them know. I was like, hey, just a heads up, I'm going to be moving. Cause I was like, my butt's going to be like right by you. But as I started moving, they're all like, we should be doing that. And a couple of them started to join me. And I think one for me, it just gave me more permission to just name to the people right in my vicinity, because it was close. It's like, hey, I'm going to start moving, just heads up. And then it was fun that they just were like, I want to be doing that too. I've been surprised how many times people are like, oh, I should be doing that more. Yeah. So with that, I want to talk about two topics that are on your bio, because it speaks to this of movement positivity and constructive misbehavior. I'll just have you, I can just in lieu of everything we're talking about and allowing in just more natural movement, more movement through your day. What do you mean by movement positivity and constructive misbehavior?
Yeah. Well, the phrase movement positive really was inspired by what we hear in terms of like sex positivity or body positivity. But we know we are in a societal lack of enough movement, and that the evidence of that manifests in many, many different ways. And, you know, not always ways that people directly attribute to movement, like mental health, or, you know, even the ways that we're structuring our homes, our workspaces, the physical environments that we are in are a big part of the reason that we're lacking movement. It's not because we didn't go to the gym enough times, but it's the actual spaces that we frequent and the social setups that we're in aren't encouraging us to move, and that probably doing the opposite through like kind of cultural codes of conduct, what's appropriate, what's professional, what's good manners in this situation. Like all of these things are keeping us from moving, not just when we're with others, but when we're on our own. So it's not just the spaces we're in, even the things that we wear. Like a lot of the ways that we clothe our bodies restricts movement. So for me, movement positivity, it is a lot of things. And one is, it's kind of a scale of like, is this thing, let's say a shoe, is it inhibiting the natural way that your foot moves in some ways? Is it taking away for your possibilities of movement, or is it allowing your foot to do what it does or do what it needs to do? Or how's your home environment? Is it going towards the positive? Is it reminding you to move? Is it encouraging move? And maybe is it encouraging movement in not the ways that would require choosing to do a thing, like having a floor space and some monkey bars. I love that. Yeah. But even like having surfaces that you frequently stand on that are a little bit unstable. Or like you're just going to create more of these really small scale micro oscillations all throughout the day. And then beyond that is that in so many of the movement environments that people are a part of, there's pretty tight rules of what's appropriate. And there's a lot of pedestaling or like shaming different forms of movement for being more or less valid, or that's stupid, this is real movement, and so forth. And I wish there was a lot more just general celebration of anybody who's actually moving, rather than the first thing that for a lot of people they tend to do is criticize the choices that are being made. Oh, that person's walking weird, rather than like first just going, hey, we want more of this. Of course we can overdo everything, but like just societally, like more movement, these are good things. So it doesn't matter if you think it's a silly aerobics workout with pink weights, like first like celebrating it and not trying to create as much of a hierarchy or any hierarchy within forms of movement. So all of that together, that is a part of this.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great breakdown, all the way from like the shoe you're wearing, to how your home is set up, to even the hierarchy that can seem to exist in the movement and fitness industry. Because I love that. Yeah, just like wanting movement positivity, just celebrating more and more movement. If somebody's moving, might be different than what you do or what you think is quote unquote the best, but if they're having a good time and enjoying it, amazing. Celebrating that and not needing to criticize or make your way better.
And that doesn't mean that there's not, that we're gonna turn away from opportunities for improvement or growth, not at all. But it's important that we leave that up to people that are seeking it, rather than people trying to let others know that there's something not right about what they're doing, because that just contributes to our collective like shame and armoring around moving your body and being able to autonomously identify what would nourish you, because people are so afraid of doing the wrong thing, or like to looking, the irony is like we're afraid of looking like beginners so much. We are afraid of looking like beginners, looking, this like that weird became such a place that people don't want to tread into.
Yeah,
because it's alarming for people to see somebody moving in ways that we've deemed as like inappropriate, or that is signaling that there's something wrong with a person, like wildly waving your arms. There must be something wrong with this individual if they're moving that way and they're not playing a sport at the same time. So.
Yeah, that's an important distinction that you just made. So I'm glad that you made that. And so with that, what would you speak to in constructive misbehavior?
That these, it's like codes of conduct. Sometimes they're written out. usually they're not. They're just like something that we kind of all understand. We're in the grocery store right now. At what level of knee flexion, when like bending my knees, right? At what level of bending my knees would it be weird to walk down this aisle? Because I could walk with my legs, walking as I normally do. Or like, how big can my stride get before it starts to be like, oh, that's strange. That's a little bit weird. And so that's like the misbehaving is like to break these codes of conduct, maybe just a little bit, but it's ultimately doing something very constructive. And that is that it's getting you to move in more varied ways. It's getting you to recognize that the opportunities to play with any moment, they're always there. Like you can play with any moment that you pass through. And that as people start to see somebody walking down the aisle, let's say they're pushing their cart and doing some kind of like little walking lunge or like waddling, kind of swishing their tail feathers side to side, more people will be intrigued and get this sense of permission than they will be distraught at someone's self-expression. Those people exist, but we have to work on not letting those like actually the rare people that are disturbed by a little bit more movement than we are normally doing inhibit us in this moment, but it's long-term consequences of whittling down your capacity because you're trying to fit into codes of behavior. If we move in the ways that we're supposed to move in our home, in our workplaces, like it doesn't even matter, in the park, usually people suffer because of it. Their capacity for movement is so much smaller than we are structured to move. Like you aren't moving like a human. You aren't moving like a human if you follow the common codes of behavior. So I am encouraging people to do a little bit of misbehavior, which might mean misusing the gym equipment or like the grocery store example, even in your own office space. Like, have you ever been upside down in your office chair in some way? Let's do it right now here. Like,
I have a massage table in my office, and I often, at least once a day, I try and I get upside down, but not that way, but I go, yeah.
Right. So I'm on a podcast. I know that lots of people can't see this, but I have this like wobble stool. And usually on a podcast, you don't like belly spin on a wobble stool. And here I am, like nearly falling over. Right?
Yeah.
And this is horribly embarrassing for a lot of people, but I do it on Zoom meetings for business things. And people usually go, wow, I'm so glad you're moving, or it looks like you're having a good time.
Yeah, it does look like you're having a good, I'm like, I want to get a wobble stool. That
right.
looks fun. I want to spin in circles.
You can spin in circles and fall over. It's so much fun.
Yeah.
But then that's just an example, because like we've kind of come to know we're doing this serious thing. It's like a podcast, we're on Zoom. We need to face forward, but I still have a microphone on.
I'm normally, if I'm not doing an interview on Zoom, I'm honestly normally laying on the floor and I'm rolling around and foam rolling because I have a challenge time to sit on Zoom. And what you said, Marlo, and I think that like all of these ways of if we're trying to fit in to a certain way and shifting our movement, inhibiting our movement, how that's limiting our movement capacity. This might be a broad reach, but I really believe the more limited our movement capacity is, the more in the embodiment world, also then the more limited our emotional capacity is, our mental capacity, our capacity to be with what is in life, to be with the difficulties, the hardships, the emotions that come up. Because movement is key. Movement is what allows us to increase elasticity in the body, to increase, there's so much, right? But if we're continuously, we only move in this little box in this linear way, I think that really is a detriment to our overall well-being completely.
Yeah. And there's a, something that I always want to be mindful of. And that is that, people lose capacity or are disabled. And that does not mean like, because they're not as able-bodied as another, that then would be limited in terms of self-expression.
Yeah.
You know, but with the capacity that anyone has, do you feel free to access it? And I'm going beyond like the you know, like having the mobility to, but this like sense that you have access to play with what you have, what your capacity
With what
is.
you're capable of completely.
Are you willing to play? And if there's not a willingness, are you willing to find out why? Are you willing to try? And that's really what's important, and certainly impacts the way that you're going to engage with others, your environments, like your role as a member of this ecosystem. So you cannot be in practice of ignoring your body's request to move, and then have the capacity to move, and then not suffer because of it in some way. Because that is the disembodiment, that, you know, going back to the initial question.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm glad that you even just brought of course, if you know, somebody does have a disability, isn't, you know, fully able-bodied, there is just more of the willingness to access whatever your potential is in your body.
Which and not all days people feel
no,
like,
I mean,
you know,
I remember
there.
working with a client for a while. She was a coaching client, and she was recovering from total hip replacement. And so it wasn't an in-person, like raw thing, any manual work. It was all coaching over the phone, but we were really working with movement. And we did a lot with her breath in her initial healing, right? Because movement or breath can provide so much movement. Yeah.
You know what? Even like, let's say, hands, you know, if you have a function in your hands, there's dance forms, like entire dance forms, tutting, finger tutting, waving, that you can do incredible storytelling, rhythmic coordination activities, like with just the hands and the wrists. And that, you know, it's an example of like a simple movement practice that sometimes is really helpful for people to drop in at any moment, like, you know, feeling their hands touching hand to hand. But that can go so far in like an artistic endeavor, or like that there's even in Vogue dance, there's something called hand performance, you know, and it's, you know, choose your part of the body. There's somebody who would perform some kind of sideshow stuff, who just did like tricks with their scapula, because they were so good at like isolating and moving their shoulder blades at these like rhythmic intervals that you know, we have any area of the body can become grounds for like deep focus and flow state, and even like levels of artistry that you might not have ever considered in your life.
Yeah. I'd like to, on this note, since you are like a fan and mover of moving in what people might name as weird ways in conventional areas, I think most recent, you shared a post on Instagram of you were using TRX and undulating your spine, and you were doing all sorts of things, and you were on the post talking about toxic linearity. So it feels like an important thing to start discussing, and what happened with that post, what you mean by toxic linearity. And
well, you know, first, this is an example of how just a tiny thing can snowball. And I film a lot of stuff I do in the gym, and you know, when I'm filming, I'm usually not like, oh, I'm making a piece of content. I wish I knew how to plan that well. I don't. I just film stuff that I'm doing, and sometimes I throw it in my Instagram stories, and this phrase just passed through my mind of like, toxic linearity. I'm working against it. Threw it in my Instagram stories, and I had a lot of responses to it. People go, wow, what is that? Or I love that phrase. So it was resonating with people, or like striking curiosity. And I shared it, and it started rolling out of the sphere of people who rapidly embrace this idea. And like, they're like, I know exactly what you mean by that. That's why I don't go to the gym. That's why I don't go to the gym. And into people that perhaps the word toxic was a word that made it difficult for them to be receptive to the rest of the message or read the caption, that whole thing.
Yeah.
So, toxic linearity is, if you are to just for a moment picture, when we think exercises like in the gym and fitness, the ways that bodies are moving, it might be, there's going to be a lot of just forward stuff. So like sagittal plane movement. It's like repetitions of like the same thing again and again, which is fine. We have to repeat things to become skillful in them. But there's very little oscillation and spiraling and undulation, which are the ways that we are best suited to deal with kinetic energy, or meaning like the energy of a body and movement. If you look at high level athletics, like people throwing stuff really hard, punching, martial arts, there's spiraling and twisting all over the place. Or when we need to move from point A to B, there are these waves of energy that are passing through our body. And if it's difficult to picture in a human, like this classic slowed down videos of like dropping a cat, and the way that they kind of coil and they absorb, and there's just so much like sponginess and wave, like very fast waves in their body. But it's removed from our fitness culture for the most part. And that has very real implications for people's motor skills and for their ability to deal with the real life situations. Like the typical gym exercises don't prepare you to fall on ice well.
No. I was just thinking about it yesterday. It's been really icy in Boulder, and I'm always walking my dog, and I have this very icy parking lot by my office. I'm like, this is...
all the power yoga in the world, or like just typical strength training does not prepare you for the like off the vertical axis, single leg, rapid groin stretch that might happen in ice. And then the ability to fall and roll well, that kind of stuff. And it's really been removed. And this is like, the more ancestral movement wisdom that we see in traditional movement practices, like traditional dances, indigenous, aboriginal dances from around the world. There are pulsations and elasticity and like coiling, uncoiling. It's just and martial arts forms within there, and just like totally removed from the common gym culture. So that is a reference to linearity. There's like the kind of the worship of lines and squaring. Also within the dance world, there's a phrase used about somebody's lines, meaning like usually reference to their ability to like hyperextend their knees and point their toes really well. And when somebody says, wow, they have such nice lines, usually that's because somebody trained since childhood to have a skeleton that matches our, ideals. I don't know, like these ideals that were established over the last like couple hundred years through the lineages of ballet. So there's that, like this obsession with the lines that a body can make, the focus on the picture that is made in a moment in time rather than the longevity of a mover or the experience of the person moving.
Yeah.
And there's so many examples of where the ways that we think about movement goes more in lines in terms of progression rather than in foils, and that we can get better at something by it completely transforming into something else. So like progression might mean morphing, that a practice disintegrates and becomes something new. That doesn't mean that you quit something. And that's something that people sometimes struggle with. They feel really stuck in their practice and uninspired by their practice, because this kind of like the only way that we're progressing is if we're getting better in these more like linear notions, that rather than it becoming something that can change like moment to moment, and over the course of a lifetime is going to change to unrecognizably.
Yeah. And
That's
allowing for
wonderful.
like the visual that I'm seeing is like, it could go this direction or this direction, and like just more circular versus, you know, we spoke a little bit about this before we started recording, but I say this to every single coaching client of mine when we first start working together, of the healing journey, the personal growth like journey isn't linear. And I think we often do ourselves a disservice because we have this idea of, oh, I'm going to like start feeling better about myself, or this is going to start feeling easier, and then I'll just get easier and better and better. And then like a speed bump hits or a roadblock and you're triggered and you're like, oh my God, I'm all the way back to where I was. And I think that can show up maybe similarly, a little different in a movement practice as well. And I think it's a disservice when we have this expectation that it's a linear progress. Because I don't think any healing and growth is linear. There are layers. Sometimes even in the like structural integration Rolfing world, the simple way to talk about like the peelings of an onion and the layerings, which might happen as circular progress. It might happen, you know, you're feeling good and then there's a little this. And I feel those speed bumps, those plateaus, those moments when a body signal or an emotional signal is loud are actually gifts. I think it's opportunities to take a moment and pause and be like, okay, is this really serving me? Is this, what is it that's desiring to be expressed? Yeah.
Plateaus. It's a frustrating place to be. And it's a word that I hear a lot, particularly is that, you know, I teach pole dance, and when we are in a rush to have a capacity that we might not really be prepared to express, we often get this feeling like you've come to a standstill. And being a little more willing to play with exactly what your body is presenting as possible right now, spend a little bit longer in the positions that you find yourself in, like get into the in-betweens a little bit more, kind of like this internal massaging of like, okay, I'm here right now. What can I learn from or notice in this moment, in this position that I've never noticed before? Because progression and growth, like expanding your awareness of what you're doing, is also a form of progression. But when we are frustrated about what we're like labeling as a lack of growth, or like we're getting worse or we're plateauing, we don't pay attention to those things.
Totally.
And then it becomes even more important to shake it out and wiggle it out. You know, if somebody's saying I'm feeling stuck, I'm like, okay, I think what we need is some rhythmic movement and, you know, like a bounce fest. We need to bounce it out, because that literally we need to shake up. We need to shake up that feeling of stuckness and flatness that we're equating with a plateau or regression. Shake it up.
Yeah. Shaking something.
I'm shaking right now.
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing what that can release, what that can create more, like be even the more capacity or space to be with those in-between moments, right? When you can just shake it off. And yeah, I feel like having a dog, she's such a good example of that. You know, anytime we're out or shifting and she has like a quick moment of agitation or like trauma, she just shakes and then she's good. She moves beyond. Amazing. I feel like I could ask you so many more questions, but time wise, yeah, I'm going to kind of start to bring us to close and to summary. And I guess the question I like to end with, one of them is, being with everything we just talked about, your one main takeaway, which can sometimes be hard to make it just one, but that everyone should do who wants to live a more radically embodied life.
I think it's coming down to like breaking these rules that you've inherited, that are unsaid, or perhaps that you've set for yourself. But usually there's a lot of inheriting the rules that we are setting for ourselves. But making it a little like that, can I enjoy the mischief of it? Like, can you like play with that a little bit? And that could start with, well, you know, if you're sitting on something right now, like rocking or bouncing on the chair, or as you are even like washing dishes, move your pelvis more than you would normally move. And if somebody from your family comes in, great. Figure out your excuse. I'm doing a mischief practice. Yeah, I think that it starts to, I feel this like simmer of it stirring up stuff that's been stagnant. There's a playfulness, there's a you know, that is the thinking outside the box, so to speak, and it's moving outside of the box, which will surely invite some other positive shifts in our disposition.
Completely. Yeah. It's like shaking the cobwebs. I mean, think like the cobwebs in the fascia, the stagnation, just wiggle it, shake it. Like, and I love how you just name that of, even if somebody walked in on you and what are you doing? Just, oh, I'm playing a mischievous game. It's so simple, right? They're just like, and then they might be curious, like, do you want to play? Do you want to play this mischievous game?
Yeah. Dipping your toes into the pool of weird is a great place to go. Like, how much of your body are you willing to dip into the weirdness today? I want you eventually to be like swimming in the deep end and like rubbing it into every cell in your body, because promise it'll feel better. It'll feel better.
Yeah. Amazing. How can people find more about you, about your work? If they wanted, they're ready to more than just dip their toes.
Well, my website is flowmovement.net. Unfortunately, flowmovement.com was owned by a plumber back in the day.
That's funny.
You know, I don't know if they still have it, but anyway, I'm quite active on Instagram. So Marlo Fisken on Instagram is probably where you can get the most a real-time sense of what these things that I was speaking about today, or what those actually look like. There's a lot of video evidence there of that. Yeah.
It's good video inspiration to help your own mischievous game as you are ready to, like, what would be a little bit like, you know, as you're walking out the door, going into your car, just playing with that. How could I elicit a little bit more movement that feels good? Yeah. I feel like your Instagram's a good inspiration for that. Awesome. And those will all be linked on the show notes too, so you can find those. Amazing. Thank you so much, Marlo.
Thank you.
Just appreciate like what you're sharing. And I hope, I know for myself, and I hope for listeners, it's provoking some new ways of thinking about movement, your movement practice, and even just your, you know, day-to-day life and how you're choosing to live, how your house is set up.
Well, thank you for creating a platform, channel, podcast to share these things that I care so much about. So thank you for having me.
It's my honor. Awesome. Thanks everyone for tuning in, and take care.